Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room and realized you were already judged before you spoke a single word? Not because of what you did, not because of what you said, but because of how you looked. Today's story isn't just about a courtroom. It's about bias hiding behind authority. It's about assumptions disguised as justice. And it's about a moment that exposed a truth no one was ready to face. If stories about fairness, dignity, and real justice matter to you, subscribe now, because stories like this deserve to be heard. Now, let me take you inside a courtroom where everything seemed ordinary, until it was. The courtroom of Jefferson County, Ohio was quiet in the way courtrooms always are, that tense, heavy silence where every sound feels too loud. The wooden benches were half full. Public defenders shuffled papers. A bailiff stood near the door, arms crossed, bored expression. And standing alone at the defense table was Marcus Reed. 16 years old, black, skinny frame. Wearing a wrinkled hoodie that was clearly borrowed. Hands clasped tightly in front of him. Marcus wasn't shaking, but inside, his chest felt like it was collapsing. This was his first time in court. He kept telling himself, just answer their questions, don't mess up, don't look angry, don't look scared. His mother sat 3 rows back, hands folded in prayer. She worked 2 jobs. She couldn't afford a private attorney. All she could do now was hope. The charge, trespassing and disorderly conduct. Marcus had been caught inside an abandoned building after school, a building kids used as a shortcut home. No theft, no damage, no prior record. But as Marcus looked up at the bench, he felt something worse than fear. He felt dismissed. Judge Eleanor Whitman had been on the bench for 22 years. She was respected, well-educated. Known for efficiency, she prided herself on moving cases quickly. When Marcus stepped forward, she glanced at his file, then glanced at him. Her eyes didn't linger. She sighed. "Mr. Reed," she said flatly, "let's not waste the court's time today." Marcus blinked. "Yes, Your Honor." She leaned back in her chair. "You were trespassing in a restricted building." "You know better, don't you?" Marcus swallowed. "I was just walking home from school. Everyone cuts through there." She raised an eyebrow. "That's not an excuse." "Poor choices tend to lead to bigger ones." His mother shifted uncomfortably. The public defender opened his mouth to speak. Judge Whitman lifted a hand. "I've seen this pattern before." The words hung in the air. This pattern. Marcus felt heat crawl up his neck. She hadn't asked about his grades, or his school, or his record. She had already decided who he was. "Let me guess," Judge Whitman continued. "No supervision after school?" Marcus stiffened. "My mom works late, Your Honor." "MMHMM," the judge said, tapping her pen. "And I assume school hasn't exactly been a priority." Marcus's mother stood up. "Your Honor, my son is an honor roll student." The judge cut her off. "Ma'am, please sit. I will not have emotional interruptions." Marcus's hands curled into fists. His GPA was 3.8. He volunteered at a community center. He dreamed of becoming a civil engineer. None of that mattered. What mattered was how he looked. Judge Whitman leaned forward. "Young man, court is not a place for excuses. It's a place for consequences." She shook her head slightly. "If we don't correct behavior early, society pays later." A few people in the gallery nodded. Marcus felt something crack inside him. He wasn't being judged for trespassing. He was being judged for existing. What Judge Whitman didn't know, what no one in that courtroom knew, was that this was not a normal case. Sitting quietly in the back row was a woman in her early 40s. Professional, calm, neutral expression. Her name was Dr. Lillian Carter, and she wasn't there by accident. Dr. Carter was an independent inspector for the State Bar Association, assigned to investigate patterns of judicial bias across county courts. No badge, no announcement, just observation. She had been rotating through courtrooms for 6 months, documenting tone, language, and conduct. Marcus's case was supposed to be routine. It was. Dr. Carter's pen stopped moving. She looked up. The judge's language, the assumptions, the lack of inquiry, this wasn't discipline. This was prejudice wearing a robe. Judge Whitman glanced at the clock. "I see no reason to prolong this." She looked directly at Marcus. Given your circumstances, I'm issuing community service and a behavioral warning. She paused. And let me be clear, if I see you back in this courtroom, the consequences will be far more severe. Marcus nodded silently. Yes, Your Honor. As he stepped back, something inside him broke, not loudly, not visibly, just quietly. Dr. Carter closed her notebook. She had seen enough. And as Marcus walked past her toward the exit, she stood up. Your Honor, she said calmly, before you adjourn, may I ask one procedural question? Judge Whitman frowned. And you are, Doctor. Carter met her gaze. My name is Dr. Lillian Carter, and I'm here on behalf of the State Bar Oversight Committee. The courtroom froze. The words State Bar Oversight Committee didn't echo loudly. They didn't need to. They landed like a silent explosion. Judge Eleanor Whitman froze mid-motion, her gavel hovering inches above the desk. For the first time that morning, her confident posture faltered. I'm sorry, she said sharply. Who did you say you were? Dr. Lillian Carter didn't raise her voice. She didn't need authority in her tone. She already had it in her presence. I'm an independent inspector assigned by the Ohio State Bar, she repeated calmly. I observe courtroom conduct to ensure ethical and unbiased judicial practice. The courtroom was no longer quiet. It was suspended. The bailiff shifted his stance. The public defender looked down at his notes, suddenly very interested. Marcus stopped walking. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. Judge Whitman cleared her throat. And why exactly are you interrupting my court? She asked. Doctor. Carter glanced briefly toward Marcus, because this case raised several procedural and ethical concerns. Marcus felt his heart pounding in his ears. Ethical concerns. About him, Judge Whitman straightened in her chair. This young man committed an offense, she said defensively. My ruling was appropriate. Dr. Carter nodded once. May I ask, she said, what evidence you reviewed regarding his academic record, family environment, or prior conduct? Judge Whitman hesitated. The charge itself is sufficient. Doctor. Carter tilted her head slightly. Interesting. Because earlier this morning, in a similar trespassing case involving a white juvenile defendant, you asked about GPA, extracurriculars, and parental supervision. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Marcus's mother felt dizzy. Judge Whitman's jaw tightened. I treat all cases individually. Dr. Carter opened her notebook. Then let's discuss your language. She flipped a page. You stated, I've seen this pattern before. You assumed lack of supervision. You implied future criminality. She looked up. Those are not legal findings. Those are assumptions. The judge's face flushed. I was speaking generally. Dr. Carter didn't interrupt. She simply waited. Silence is powerful when you let it speak. Marcus stood there, unsure if he was allowed to move. Dr. Carter turned toward him for the first time. Marcus Reed, she said gently. May I ask you a question? Judge Whitman hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Marcus swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Do you attend Jefferson High School? Yes. What's your GPA? 3.8. A sharp intake of breath from the gallery. Any disciplinary record? No, ma'am. Any prior arrests? No, Dr. Carter nodded, then turned back to the judge. These facts were never requested, she said evenly. Yet they were requested in comparable cases. Marcus felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Validation. For the first time that day, an adult in authority had asked instead of assumed. Judge Whitman leaned back, folding her arms. This is highly irregular, she said. You're undermining judicial authority. Dr. Carter met her gaze. No, Your Honor. I'm protecting it, she gestured around the room. Courts exist to apply the law, not stereotypes. She paused. Justice is not efficient when it's unfair. The judge opened her mouth, then closed it, because every eye was now on her, not with respect, with expectation. The public defender stood. Your Honor, he said carefully, in light of this information, I request the court reconsider its remarks on record. Judge Whitman looked at Marcus, really looked at him, not as a case file. Not as a pattern, but as a teenager standing alone in front of power. And for the first time, uncertainty crossed her face. Judge Whitman exhaled slowly. "The court will amend the record," she said. "My previous remarks will be stricken." She paused. "Mr. Reed, you are free to go," Marcus blinked. "That's it," he whispered. "Yes," she said shortly. Marcus turned toward his mother. She was crying, not loudly, not dramatically, just tears of relief sliding down her face. As Marcus passed Dr. Carter, she spoke quietly. "Remember this moment," she said. "You matter even when someone forgets." He nodded, unable to speak. Behind them, Judge Whitman sat in silence. She had dismissed a boy that morning, but now she realized someone had been watching. And more importantly, so had history. Marcus thought the worst part was over when he stepped outside the courthouse. He was wrong, because sometimes justice doesn't end when the gavel falls. It begins there. As the heavy courtroom doors closed behind them, Marcus felt the weight in his chest finally loosen. The air outside felt different, lighter, freer. His mother wrapped her arms around him tightly, holding him like she was afraid the world might take him back. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Marcus nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. But behind those doors, Dr. Lillian Carter hadn't left. She never does. She sat alone now, quietly reviewing her notes. Judges often assume oversight ends when cases end. They forget that accountability doesn't require applause. It requires records. And today's record was troubling. 2 weeks later. Judge Eleanor Whitman sat in her chambers, flipping through a thick envelope marked "Confidential, State Bar Review." Her stomach tightened. She had received complaints before. Every judge had. But this felt different. Inside were transcripts, highlighted phrases, time-stamped remarks, her words, her assumptions, her tone. "I've seen this pattern before. Lack of supervision. This usually doesn't end well." On paper, stripped of context and ego, they didn't sound judicial. They sounded personal. And for the first time in her career, Judge Whitman asked herself a question she had never allowed before. Was I wrong? The Judicial Council meeting was tense. No cameras, no press, just peers. Some sympathetic, some defensive. "This is an overreaction," one judge muttered. "We can't police tone." Dr. Carter responded calmly. "This isn't about tone," she said. "It's about patterns." She laid out data, case comparisons, sentencing language, discretion outcomes, side by side, black defendants, white defendants, same charges, different assumptions. The room grew quiet. Bias doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers consistently enough to shape lives. Meanwhile, Marcus went back to being a teenager. School, basketball practice, college applications, but something had changed. Teachers listened a little closer. Counselors encouraged a little more. One afternoon, his civics teacher stopped him after class. "You ever thought about law?" she asked. Marcus laughed. "After court, no thanks," she smiled gently. "Sometimes the people hurt by the system are the ones who change it." That night, Marcus Googled something he never had before: how to become a lawyer. Judge Whitman wasn't removed from the bench. There was no dramatic downfall. Instead, something harder happened. Mandatory bias training, public review, mentorship oversight, and a letter placed permanently in her judicial file. Not a scarlet letter, a mirror. Months later, in a different courtroom, a different teenager stood before her. She paused, asked questions, listened, really listened. Because being watched doesn't end when inspectors leave. Sometimes, being watched means you finally start seeing. This story isn't about a bad judge. It's about a system that works only when we challenge it to be better. Bias doesn't always come from hate. Sometimes it comes from habit. And justice doesn't require perfection. It requires humility. 5 years passed. The courthouse still stood on the same corner. Brick walls, cold steps, flags fluttering in the Ohio wind. But Marcus Reed was no longer the boy who once stood there shaking. He was taller now, sharper, calmer, and wearing a suit. Inside his briefcase was a law school acceptance letter, already creased from how many times he'd taken it out just to look at it. Howard University School of Law. Full scholarship. Marcus paused at the courthouse steps, memories rushing back, the judge's words, the assumptions, the silence before Dr. Carter spoke. Some moments never leave you. They become fuel. Judge Eleanor Whitman had changed too, not dramatically, not publicly, but quietly. She now paused before speaking, asked before assuming, listened before ruling. The letter in her file had followed her, not as shame but as awareness. She remembered Marcus, not his case number, his eyes. On this morning, her clerk handed her a schedule. "Judge, there's a youth legal mentorship program visiting today." She nodded. "Send them in." When the group entered, her breath caught. Marcus Reed stood at the front, confident, composed and looking straight at her. The room was silent, not awkward, reverent. Marcus introduced himself. "My name is Marcus Reed. I'm a pre-law student and mentor with the Justice Forward program." Judge Whitman stood. "Mr. Reed," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I remember you." "So do I," Marcus replied respectfully. She hesitated, then did something unexpected. She stepped down from the bench. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for reminding me why this seat matters." No apology, no excuses, just acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's how healing begins. Dr. Lillian Carter watched the mentorship footage later that evening. She smiled, not because the system had been exposed, but because it had responded. Too often, stories about racism end with punishment, but real progress often looks like responsibility. Growth, change that doesn't trend but lasts. She closed her laptop. Another inspection complete. Another life redirected. Marcus stood before a group of high school students weeks later. Many looked like he once did, uncertain, labeled too early, judged too fast. "I want you to know something," he said. "Justice isn't automatic, fairness isn't guaranteed. But your voice matters, even when the room tells you it doesn't." He paused. "And sometimes the people watching are the ones who change everything." The room erupted in applause. Not because of drama, but because of truth. Globe showing America's final life lesson: strong, anti-racism. Racism doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears authority. But accountability works. Awareness works. And change is possible when we demand it. Justice isn't blind. It learns if we let it. Bell final call to action, emotional and natural. If this story meant something to you. Backhand index pointing. Write like this video to support voices that challenge bias. Backhand index pointing. Write subscribe for stories that matter. Backhand index pointing. Write share it. Because someone needs to hear this today.